The evolutionary theory of origins is contrary to the orthodox Christianity and the Word of God. Anyone who has an interest in what the Bible says should understand clearly that there is no room in biblical Christianity for evolution, existentialism, situation ethics, or any other form of the new morality. Now, you may fail to see the correlation between evolutionary theories and the new morality, but believe me, there is one. St. Paul proceeded to establish that link for the church at Rome. Wherefore also God gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their own heart, to dishonor their bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. This is Romans 1, verses 24 and 25. In today's confused world, particularly in Western society, the interrelationship between the meaning of life and the realization of fulfillment and purpose on the one hand, and the reality, the wisdom, and the goodness of God the Creator on the other, is lost in man's thinking. Godless philosophy has succeeded in fragmenting the universe and life upon this earth into so many notions, shooting off in different directions, that the relationship between our origins and our compatibility with God in our behavior is vague or non-existent in the minds of the people in many, perhaps most, instances. Most men, even religious ones, do not think that God, the Bible, the church, and Christianity have much, if anything, to do with values, family, education, friends, and vocation in life. But ignorance by the masses does not change anything. Man can only function properly when he first has a right relationship to God. The biblical structure of morality, the man-woman relationship, and the right and acceptable moral behavior in the sight of God and decent men everywhere is not simply a matter of how we have been raised, what our society will allow in terms of permissiveness, or what we happen to feel like doing. It's a cause and effect thing. Man cannot behave in an honorable way unless he understands who he is and where he came from. Well, this will never be learned from the godless theories of blind fools busily engaged in misinformation and disinformation. This basic understanding comes only from the Bible. The conjugal relationship between male and female is anchored in the union between man and God. According to the Bible, man is to the woman what God is to mankind. The relationship between man and woman from the Garden of Eden typified the relationship between God and his creation. God created man in the original instance because he was lonely and he needed someone of his own kind to intercourse with. But the relationship between man and woman is not exactly like the relationship between man and God. Thus, while Adam and God had a relationship, God was not always present in the garden with Adam, and it was not exactly a relationship that was on a horizontal level, such as person with person. So man was still left with an immediate physical need for intimacy. God created the woman to intercourse with the man in physical, spiritual, social ways in much the same form or pattern as God intercoursed with man. We might have said as God did before the fall and does again in the regeneration, and that would be a true statement with a profound meaning, yet there are some ways in which God has continued to interact with man and his society, even in his fallen state. The relationship is typified by the man-woman relationship. At the point at which man began to rebel against God and look only horizontally to himself and no longer vertically up to God, he was guilty of a kind of spiritual homosexuality. Instead of the rightful relationship of spiritual intercourse through submission to the Creator, man took that imperative and moral aspect of his being and wrongfully extended it to other mortals when it belonged to God alone. Now, this evil expressed itself in many ways. Men looked at themselves as having created themselves with their own theories, inventions, and wanton behavior. Mankind saw himself as being able to propagate his whole being, moral and spiritual as well as physical, without a need for a relationship with his Creator. Well, this was a distorted and warped relationship that began to take its toll on mankind. It did not stop with his loss of fellowship with God. It began to filter down into all man's life relationships. First, it affected man's relationship with his brother. Cain slew Abel because Abel was in Cain's way, and Cain did not think that he needed his brother anymore. Then there was man's rebellion against decency. In the first dispensation, before the great universal flood, there was violence, wickedness, bloodshed, and a complete disregard for the needs and rights of others, according to the 5th and 6th chapters of Genesis. After the flood, this spiritual homosexuality began to express itself in a rebellion against authority. Now, God put authority in society after the flood in order to govern and intimidate. In the days of Noah, God said, "Therefore, whosoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, because it is evident that man cannot live in this world without intimidations." Fear would be one of the few languages that he would understand. Irrespective of the invented, deliberately distorted, and dishonest attempts of sociology to show that capital punishment is not a deterrent against capital crimes, the truth is, acknowledged by the Bible more than 4,000 years ago in the days of Noah, that capital punishment is one of the few things that man does understand. The only thing that would keep him from wantonly taking the life of his fellows, as he had prior to the flood, would be the threat of retaliation and death. Fallen man began immediately to rebel against this authority that God had placed in society. Then this rebellion digressed to the home. Wives began to rebel against husbands, and then children against parents. Well, at first these rebellious acts by wives and children were socially condemned, and we were dealing only with the rebellious individual. Then others sided with the rebel, and finally educators, senates, courts, and law enforcement agencies began to join them in their defection from God-given responsibility to obey duly appointed authority. Thus we see both the objective judgments of God and the cause and effect development in man's life and society. Finally, we see the ultimate expression of rebellion in the human race, man rejecting his own nature, the order of the sexes, and the natural heterosexual relationship of man toward woman. Listen to verses 26 and 27. For this cause God gave them up to vile affections. For even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust toward one another, man with man, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error, which was meet, or in other words, just or deserved. Because man has always felt the need to justify himself in his evil deeds, to make himself appear right and with license in the thing he has done, along with the rejection of the natural moral structure came the rejection of the moral law, which condemned such behavior. The clever way that this has come about in our society is through the so-called new morality or situation ethics. This has led to a condition in this country that has often been described by knowledgeable Christian thinkers as the post-Christian era. As short a time ago as 40 years, the moral law was unchallengeable. If you committed adultery, you did it, but you did not claim that it was right. You acknowledged that it was wrong. In the 40s and 50s, when I was in school, men were growing hard of heart and violating the moral law, but no claims were being made that the moral law was not valid or that it did not exist. Then slowly the new morality, situation ethics began to take hold of people's thinking. Like most of the sicknesses and perversions in society, its spread started in the universities as warped and premeditatedly evil professors, demigods on ego trips and power trips, began a deliberate and cunning campaign of pulling children away from parents, churches, authorities, and an a priori belief in the moral law. Young people who had been unwisely entrusted to educators with the mistaken belief that these were men of integrity who were interested in truth. Young people went away to schools expecting to learn something of value. What happened instead was that these sinister old spiders lured these dewy-eyed children into their web and began to devour their unsuspecting minds and souls. They paralyzed them with the poison in their minds, with evolutionary no absolutism. It's only wrong if you think it's wrong. It's right if you think it's right. If it feels good, do it. You do your thing. Do what you want to do. There's no God to say anything is wrong. And the Bible is a pack of lies made up by religious men intent on dictatorial control. Do not listen to your mother, your father, the policeman, or your minister. Pay no attention to the Bible or the imaginary God it is supposed to speak for. Don't listen to anybody but me. Oh, of course it wasn't put this way. It was phrased, don't listen to anybody. But the person who was being listened to, of course, was the one who was saying, don't listen to anybody. This was the education that your children were getting, and this began to be the order of the day. All of this can be summarized as a society rebelling against the moral law. The Ten Commandments, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not bear false witness, and so on, that had formed the backbone of Anglo-Saxon and Judaic Christian law through the centuries, has now been discarded entirely. In its place is the antinomian, and that means against law, creed, which was specifically devised by the queers in the media, public education, and government to justify the ultimate rebellion in society, which is perversion. Many times discussions take place about what homosexuality really is. Is it a legitimate thing? If not, is it a physical ailment? Is it a mental disease? What is it? Recently, a scientist, in order to avoid the growing criticism that this is a learned behavioral pattern that is being foisted upon young men by peer pressure and intimidation, this scientist, to avoid this, came out with the notion that it is genetic and hereditary and that people cannot help it. He failed to answer the obvious question as to why the instances of homosexuals has increased by many thousands fold since the attack by the university movement upon traditional moral values. This is just one more of the self-serving lies that is hatched up as needed by vile people totally lacking in conscience. The Bible answers the question quite simply. Homosexuality is the ultimate expression of spiritual degeneration and evil. For this cause, is reading in verse 22, for this cause God gave them over to vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature, and likewise the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lusts one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving the judgment in themselves, that recompense of their error, which is meet or is just. There's never been more despair, emptiness, and happiness, sadness, gloom, and restlessness, frustration, and anger, and the inability to be fulfilled than in our society today. The sin bears its own judgment, receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which they deserve. People have destroyed their relationships with each other. Man has destroyed his home, his ability to marry that childhood sweetheart, to live together in faithfulness and loyalty, and to raise a family, and to commit themselves to one another for life. A few years back, I was talking to a beautiful young lady who works for me. She was contemplating an immoral situation in her life. Well, she thought very highly of me, and she knew my convictions, and she was concerned about my feelings, so she wanted to try to explain it to me so that it would seem all right. She said, "I'm certain I can do this if I want to, and if it's right for me." I said, "Well, let's put that to the test and find out whether you can do this." She looked at me with a rather startled face and asked, "How can we do that?" "It's very simple," I told her. I opened one of the drawers of my desk and produced a carpenter's hammer that I keep for a variety of tasks around the office. I said, "Here, take the hammer in this hand. Now put one of your fingers on the desk. Now raise the hammer up over your head and hold it there for a minute. Then tell yourself, I won't be bound by any law. I don't care what it is, natural law, moral law, any other kind of law. I'm a free moral agent. No law is going to bind me and impose upon my freedoms. I will do as I please, and I'm not going to be hurt by it either. You're not going to threaten me and intimidate me with that stuff anymore. Now bring that hammer down on your finger and see whether that works out. See if you can smash your finger. See if you can defy natural law without hurting yourself. Then apply that same principle to what you're planning to do in the moral realm to your life. Then you will know if you can do it without mutilating yourself and your future. This is what man has done to himself today. He's taken the law of God and smashed himself with it, body, soul, and spirit. Now he's hurting as a result. He's in pain. He's distorted. He's dying because he has beaten himself to death by his own rebellious rejection and contempt for the law of God. God has given him over to do this. When I was a lad in school, the ultimate insult, the one thing that you could make even a sissy fight over, was to call him a queer. But now, this is not an insult anymore. Society, the courts, the legislators, educators, the media, yes, and even the religious world is indignant and is coming to his defense. Recently I saw on the news where the court upheld the right of the Navy to fire service personnel caught in homosexual acts. Well, the person who was reporting this was so shocked, disgusted, and outraged that the court would actually allow any free moral agent to be fired from the service of his country simply because he was a homosexual, that he was trembling with rage so that he could hardly talk. Now he's been joined by the president of our country, who is also outraged that these vile criminals are excluded from contaminating our military. He has appointed a pipe-smoking lesbian for an attorney general who will make sure that it is not the law of the land much longer, the Supreme Court, and be damned. This perverted, distorted, vile practice that St. Paul called unspeakable so that it was a shame to even mention is accepted in our so-called enlightened society. But how can that be? How can normal people accept the disgusting, the rotten, the stinking, the unthinkable? Well, the Bible tells us exactly why. Listen to it. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. The answer to that question is that normal people cannot do these things. These are abnormal, unnormal, subnormal acts. And so the mind has to be distorted and warped. For 50 years, we have had an all-out brainwashing campaign in our schools, the media, and Congress. It has worked as planned, but only because of the judgment of God. God gave them over to a reprobate mind, a mind devoid of judgment, of wisdom, and of understanding, and the ability to reason soundly. These are the types of minds that accept the repulsive, loathsome, aberrant behavior patterns as normal. God gives people over to that kind of a mind. Only when a man is in a right relationship with God can he be fulfilled, happy, and lead a normal, profitable life. The condition of a distorted and warped mind, devoid of judgment, is a punishment from God against the human race for its rebelliousness, disrespect, lawlessness, and open contempt for the rules of God. Lest we feel sorry for such a man, remember this is what he wanted, and even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them what they wanted. It's like the father who gets tired of arguing with his daughter and says, "All right, go ahead and go out with that creep if that's what you're bound to do." So the daughter winds up in a wasted, beat up, used, abused, and hopeless situation in life because finally her father gave her what she wanted. It's a judgment against her that the wisdom of her father did not prevail and guide her in life as it was supposed to have and as it would have had she not been a nagging rebel. This is exactly what the Bible is saying about the human race. They didn't want God in their knowledge, and so God said, "All right," and he withdrew himself from their collective mind. When he did that, the mind fell all apart. Darkness invaded their thoughts. They were without understanding. They now possessed a mind which imagined up all kinds of weird ideas as to origins. The mind now works at devising up ways of destroying itself. The body, the soul, the spirit, every aspect of man's life is corrupted with repugnant, detestable, nauseating patterns of malevolence and nefariousness. But these are not unguided explosions that are scattered at random like hot lava from a volcano. These all have motivation, an agenda, and a target. They are basically acts of revolution and rebellion against the moral law and against the truth of God. What are some of the characteristics of such a mind? After giving us quite a list of them here in the end of the first chapter, which we don't have time to read just now, so I'll let you read, the apostle concludes by saying, "Who, knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do these things, but have pleasure in them that do them." Evil people like evil companions. They do not like good people. They do not like the light. They do not like the truth, and they're defiant about it. Not only will they do evil themselves, but they will seek out other evil mischief workers to participate in their evil, and together they will blaspheme and defy God. This forms the fraternity of the damned, which finds a pitiful kind of security in numbers. This is a universal problem in the human race. In some instances, individual lives or societies, it's more pronounced than others, but the condition still exists in all places and among all peoples. And one of the favorite vices of men is to think that by identifying the faults in others, they are somehow justifying themselves. But that will not work. Chapter 2 goes on to tell how a religious show and a critical judgment of others will never be the solution to the problem.